Hey guys, it's Jane. It isn't Friday. This isn't a Friday Reads. I just finished last night Neal Stephenson and Nicole Galland's new book, The Rise and Fall of D.O.D.O, and I just wanted to come and tell you all about it. Now, for people who are viewers of my channel, you will know that Neal Stephenson is my favourite author, and this has been one of my most highly anticipated reads of the year, so you won't be at all surprised to hear that I enjoyed it. I really did. I had a great time with the book, but it is quite a departure in many ways for Neal Stephenson, and so I think it's actually worth talking about in some detail so that people have, appropriate expectations when they go and pick up the book. Lots of Neal Stephenson's works are comedic at some sort of level, but they are also quite dense as a rule. If Seven Eves was like chocolate mud cake, this is souffle. D.O.D.O is just a romp from beginning to end. There is hardly any info dumping, although there's always a little bit. There's actually lots of quite flights of fancy things that aren't explained, although there is more explanation than you might necessarily expect in a standard fantasy book. So it's sort of walking that line, but the overall thrust of this is just, it is a hoot. It is like two people got together and just started throwing ideas at each other. It almost reads like an improv routine because it's so yes-anding. It's like, yes, that happened, and then this happened, and it's like becoming more and more and more ridiculous as you go. I read in an interview that Neal says that the gem, the kind of starting idea that he came up with that sort of sparked the project is he had this image of a time travel, a shadowy government agency that was in control of time travel, which is basically what D.O.D.O is. It's the Department of Diachronic Operations. That's what the acronym is. And he says, and you visit this place and it's all kind of this military kind of high-tech everything, and then you go down to the basement and you open up the time travel machine and it's just basically a cupboard with a witch sitting in it. And he just thought that was a really funny idea. And that is basically what this story is largely based off of. But as I said, it's just this whole layer upon layer upon layer of ridiculousness. Another review that I read said that they didn't think that this was a very Neal Stephenson-ish book, and I disagree. There are many Neal Stephenson classic concerns addressed here. We've got the sword fighting, we have the rise of science being dealt with, and we have money and banking coming into the story quite often. And those are all things that you find in his earlier works. We also have groups, teams of people being the hero rather than a single protagonist, and that is quite a distinctive of Neal Stephenson's writing. Another thing that I found in the story, which really reminded me of parts of Snow Crash, is that you have these large sections that are basically about the ridiculousness of bureaucracy. If you have read Snow Crash and you remember the memos that YT's mum had to read and the jargon and all that sort of business, which was some of the funniest parts of Snow Crash, we have that in this book only times n, because it's actually an epistolary novel. That's the structure of it, which I know lots of people don't like, but it's not old-fashioned. It's kind of sort of an Illuminae type construction. The largest single section of the book is told from the point of view of Melisandre Stokes, Dr. Melisandre Stokes, who is one of our main characters, and she is writing a diachronicle, which is what she calls her sort of diary that she's writing in 1851 London, where she is stranded. That is the opening of the story, and the largest single strand throughout the book is Melisandre from 1851 telling the story of how she came to be stranded in 1851 London. She's stranded because it's at the beginning of the story, it's like at the end of the month, magic will disappear from the world. And so there's no way, if she can't find a witch and get sent home, between now and the end of the month, she is stuck in 1851 London wearing a corset for the rest of her life. And so she's sort of, from the beginning, she tells the story of how she met Tristan and how she got dragged into this thing, and meeting a Rezabet, or whatever the first witch, the Hungarian witches, and all that sort of stuff. So, but then there's also interleaved with Melisandre's story, there is email messages, there is memos, internal memos. There's another character, Rebecca, who was an older woman in contemporary modern day, who is the wife of the physicist who is involved in the project. And she keeps a journal, and we get quite a few of her journal entries, and they always start with, what the temperature is and what she's been doing in her garden. And then she also talks about what's been going on with her husband's work, because that impacts her, and she gets drawn in more and more. And so more and more of her diary entries are less about the garden and more about the story. It is highly enjoyable. I'm not going to say too much more because I really don't want to spoil it to people, but I am going to give you a taster of that bureaucratic nonsense, which for me is the funniest. The funniest parts of the book come from there, and I just want to give you a taste. What I'm going to read you is written by a character who thankfully does not last long in the story. Because something quite unpleasant happens to him not long after this report that he writes. But at the beginning of the story, the D.O.D.O team is just a handful of people. We've got Melisandre, who's the linguist. We've got Tristan, who is this military black ops dude who's kind of in charge of trying to see, if this D.O.D.O thing is a going concern. We have the physicist, Dr. Oda, and that's really it from the very beginning. But when things start kind of, looking like it might actually happen, suddenly, the higher-ups in Tristan's organisation get involved. All these other people have to be brought on board, and suddenly you have this bureaucracy. Okay, so this is early in the kind of expansion of D.O.D.O. And this is part of a PowerPoint presentation reporting back by this dude who is coming in to kind of shape up the D.O.D.O team. Slide 8, Operation Bolster Gains, achievements to date, 3 of 5. Broken windows policy placed in effect. Upon initial inspection, D.O.D.O Site Prime was observed to be in a substandard physical condition with several plants deceased, presumably owing to a lack of appropriate watering rota, dirty dishes in sink, a cold cup of coffee in the microwave, a low standard of maintenance in the men's washroom, the women's was not inspected, and whiteboards rendered unusable by virtue of being entirely covered with cryptic symbols. Red Team leader spontaneously took initiative to effect a broken windows policy of proactively cleaning and tidying the space as a way of setting an example to inspire, motivate demoralised Blue Team personnel. Slide 9. Operation Bolster Gains, achievements to date, 4 of 5. Instant report. Remaining Blue Team personnel filtered in between 8 and 11 a.m. with no clear policy apparently in effect regarding work hours. At 9:13, Dr. Frank Oda and his wife Rebecca East Oda entered the facility. Dr. Oda affected bewilderment at the dramatic upsurge in whiteboard usable space area and inquired as to the fate of the calculations he had left on them the night before. Red Team leader briefed him on the broken windows policy, but before its rationale and benefits could be enumerated, was interrupted by Mrs. East Oda, who went off agenda with a lengthy and impassioned monologue containing a litany of unprofessional remarks as to the qualifications and character of Red Team leader. The tone and style of her delivery did not meet reasonable expectations as to social skills and concern for feelings of co-workers. Admittedly, this may be a high bar for Mrs. East Oda, who, according to background checks, has no work experience in high-performance collaborative organisations and a history of lashing out in defence of Dr. Oda. Oda himself was entirely silent during this event, staring off into space in a distracted manner, possibly indicative of neurological impairment, presumably age-related. The situation was diffused when Blue Team leader, Lyons, emerged from an adjoining room and announced that he was in the habit of photographing Dr. Oda's whiteboards and archiving the images as a hedge against mishaps of this type. Action items. Mrs. East Oda should be placed on a performance enhancement plan with a clear expectation that she will be terminated with prejudice if her attitude does not show clear improvement. Dr. Oda should be closely observed for further signs of senile dementia and placed on medical leave as indicated. So this is not a perfect book. There are places where I feel like it has a bit more telling than showing. There's a few jokes which are belaboured a little bit. There's one character in particular who does something which was so overwhelmingly evil and had such terrible consequences that for a moment I was broken out of the kind of hijinks feel-good vibe of the book. And to my mind, he was never really brought to book for this really horrible, horrible thing that he did. And I kind of wanted him to die in a fire and never really saw that happen. It's not a book that I would say is totally perfect. I don't think it's Neal Stephenson's greatest book. However, it is such fun. If you've never read any Neal Stephenson, I would say this is certainly one that you should give a try to. It's just such an enjoyable read. I literally found myself laughing out loud multiple occasions. It's a perfect summer read. Now, it's the middle of winter here, but that means I'll read it again this summer, so that's all good. At the very end of the story, which does have a nice conclusion and an upbeat one, so no worries on that score, it basically opens itself up to be the beginning of a continuation. And I understand that there is a spin-off series being written by somebody else called the D.O.D.O Files, which is being released serially in some manner, although that may not have actually happened yet, since this book was actually only released last week. But I'm looking forward to that. And who knows, maybe my evil nemesis is going to die in a fire in one of those stories. Maybe that's what's going to happen. But I'm going to highly recommend The Rise and Fall of D.O.D.O by Neal Stephenson and Nicole Galland. And if you guys have read it, or when you've read it, I'd love to hear what you think. Hope you're well, and I'll talk to you later. Bye!